Hi, my name is Christien Rioux, otherwise known to many of you as DilDog. I should just quickly introduce myself. That's my terrible mugshot from the one time that I was conscripted to work at Microsoft briefly on a contract after having pulled their pants down on stage at DEF CON. I was not happy to be there. It was 4 weeks of total hell, but I got an opportunity to try to understand from the inside of that company the effect of the work that I was having. It turns out they were all pretty big fans of what I was doing. You can get a lot of buy-in by having people break your stuff externally. You're trying to get change made inside a large organization. Nothing does it quite like a news article that was full of unprompted security vulnerabilities. So getting things done sometimes requires some pretty drastic changes and publications. I grew up in Maine, which is the Northeast United States. More cows than people in my hometown. I was pretty much the only system programmer for a 50-mile radius. Ended up really wanting to write video games, but somehow ended up in security. Turns out that the same kind of brain that you use to write 3D rendering cores is really good for writing buffer overflow exploits. And that a lot of people were not hacking Windows back in 1996, 1995. It was considered pretty lame to do because all of the cool exploits and all the really interesting data was on Unix and Windows and Linux and things like, well, Windows, it was a fallow field of new hacking. So I cut my teeth on that. Went to DEF CON 4. It was like 150 people compared to the 40,000 or whatever that they are today. Met a lot of the Cult of the Dead Cow folks in the 1996, 1997 timeframe, and joined the L0pht in 1998. Was responsible for LoftCrack 2.5 and a bunch of the other versions of LoftCrack that came after that. And in 1999, I hit the stage at DEF CON and released Back Orifice 2000, which was a whole lot of fun. It was a wild ride. Building something that, was relatively embarrassing to Microsoft, but was a much needed wake-up call for people who thought that, you could market your way out of security vulnerabilities. Shortly after that, we launched a company called @Stake, which was one of the first pure-play security services providers. It wasn't a great business model, but it was one of the first sort of hacker, it was a company that advertised that we actually hired hackers. And these days, a lot of security companies will openly state that they hire hackers. Back in 1999, you didn't do that. People wouldn't trust you if you said that you hired hackers. The marketing problem was very real at that point. And I spent a bunch of time, releasing exploits and doing vulnerability research, and kind of started thinking, how do I automate that? Ended up writing one of the first resourceable, retargetable decompilation systems for arbitrary binaries, and that turned into what became Veracode in 2006. So I won't belabor myself too much here. Just wanted to give you a quick intro to what I've been working on and how I got here. I worked at Apple for a little while. I released a VoIP spoofer thing, a toolkit called StuntBanana, which is now defunct, but it was a lot of fun. And in 2020, I met a couple folks with some pretty serious ideas about reinventing social media. And I had some ideas about building peer-to-peer networks on modern hardware. I had played with IPFS and Tor, knew a lot of those guys from back when I was at MIT. And noting that a lot of the peer-to-peer and onion routing technologies that exist were not really designed for mobile networks. I came up with this idea for this thing called Veilid. I want to talk about Veilid. So Veilid is a peer-to-peer app development framework. We have a sort of a long history in the hacktivism space with the Cult of the Dead Cow. There's 27 members up there. And over the years, we've released a lot of different tools, ranging from, obviously the Back Orifice and Back Orifice 2000, which was a remote access Trojan, remote control system, a remote administration suite, let's call it that. But there's actually a whole lot of other releases that we've done over the last 30, 40 years that the group's been in existence, including things like ScatterChat and some of these other tools. There's basically a history of doing things with peer-to-peer and mix-net applications. And this is sort of a next generation framework, trying to marry the concepts of onion routing and cryptographic privacy with a toolkit that provides developers access to programming idioms that make it a lot easier to develop proper mobile-friendly applications that are peer-to-peer in today's, for today's hardware. So there's a book about CDC that's coming out. Again, we had a release 2 years ago, and a new version of the book is coming out in December. If anyone wants to, pick that up and learn more about all the other folks that are in the group. And okay, so let's get into Veilid. We have the mascot of Veilid, which is a brick. His pronouns are he, them. His name is L0pht. There's a whole story behind why he's named that, but I won't get into that today. Bricks are an interesting analogy because they can be used to build things, but a properly aimed brick can change the course of history. So much like a lot of things in security, everything is dual use. I will let L0pht introduce himself. This is L0pht.
Hi there, I'm L0pht. I'm a brick, and I'm the mascot for a cool new privacy project called Veilid. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, what is Veilid? But to answer that, we have to go all the way back in time. Back to 1984 in Lubbock, Texas, when the world's longest-running hacktivist group, Cult of the Dead Cow, was born. For 40 years, CDC has been changing the world with hacking tools, text files, and hacktivism. In fact, they even coined the phrase. Fast forward to the summer of 2023 at DEF CON, when two members of the CDC, DilDog and Metis4, released a brand new privacy project called Veilid. And now you're all caught up. But wait, no, seriously, what the heck is Veilid? Short story, Veilid is an open source peer-to-peer app framework to build privacy for all.
But what does that even mean? How does it work? What the heck is this?
Well, to explain that, we've got to break down some myths about how online communication works. So let's break this down. You have your device, your phone, you want to message your bae. So you just shoot them a text, right? They shoot a text back, that's how it works. Wrong, that's not how it works. This is what actually happens. Alright, so you have your device, you have your bae, you want to text them, but in between there's Apple, there's a cloud, there's some servers storing everything. There could be a social media overlord reading every single one of your messages, or even the government. Either way, there's always somebody in the middle listening to your conversations, storing them, possibly selling all your data. And if they're storing it, that means that hackers have the possibility of getting into it, and then who knows where it goes. And what Veilid does is take out that middleman, so it's just you and someone else chatting privately. But wait, L0pht, if there's no servers, how does that even work? So let's break this down. You little pink dot, over here we have bae, little green dot. In between the two of you, rather than servers or some social media overlord, you have purple dots, nodes that are helping to transfer your messages. A node is just like you, except they can't read anything that you're writing because it is all encrypted, which keeps your data safe from prying eyes. And Veilid is a network made up of all of these nodes, lots of them. Each node is a different app and can be a completely different thing, but they all support each other. It doesn't matter if one app is bigger than the other, they're all equal. So every bit supports the network itself. You're a part of the network, Bay's a part of the network, we all are. So rather than the internet being, Jeff Bezos' cloud, the internet belongs to all of us, with communication between us how it's supposed to be.
Nerd alert.
And then encrypted, which is upgradable, it's written in Rust with Flutter bindings similar to Torn IPFS, but faster, and it's completely distributed. It's a brand new way of privately communicating with your friends with no social media oligarchs, no government, and no servers storing your data, keeping it safe from prying eyes. Because Veilid is an open-sourced app development framework, anyone can build any kind of communication app on top of it, with privacy and security built in. We've built a great community of people working together to build apps that are secure and usable. All we need is you to bring your ideas and your talents to the project, so come check us out on Veilid.com and on Twitter @VeilidNetwork, at least until we build something better. I hope you learned something from this video and come join us on Veilid. Meanwhile, L0pht out.
All right. Say hi to L0pht. Thanks, L0pht. So let's just get into it. There's a lot more technical stuff about Veilid I'm going to try to cover today. You get the general idea from the video. Veilid is not just an app. It is not just a platform. It is a framework. In fact, it's not really a platform at all because we don't host anything for you. You have to think about these apps differently. Instead of uploading your app to some cloud service, you are literally just running your code, and so is everyone else. Now, the framework provides certain tools to you in a distributed algorithm. Okay, so there's certain kinds of subsystems. So you have things that will let you talk directly between nodes, but there's also things that let you store and forward data and keep it in a distributed hash table across the network. So you've got a lot of different little pieces that the framework provides you, and the quest is to think differently about how you write your applications so that you can achieve a familiar and accessible feel to apps that don't feel any different to the end user, but are operating in a very different way. The Veilid framework is open source. It's Mozilla Public License 2.0. Which is one of the more permissive open source licenses for both open source and commercial uses. So we're not really judging if you want to try to make money with your app, you're allowed to build commercial apps with it. Good luck with that. We don't have any commercial apps today, and we're not necessarily looking to assist with commercialization. However, we're trying to keep the legal side of this as simple as possible. The goal here is the framework helps you build peer-to-peer mobile-first network applications. One does have to think differently when dealing with networks that are under high churn. When you have a peer-to-peer network, you're kind of depending on all of the other nodes in the network being there for you in some way. When you're on a mobile network, you have things like switching between a cellular IP address that is a symmetric NAT and going to a Wi-Fi address, and then you drive in your car through a tunnel, and nodes come and go. The churn is a lot higher than some other peer-to-peer networks where you're used to just having cloud servers all connected to each other up 24/7. So the framework has to be written in a way that is ready for high churn. We borrowed some of the concepts of IPFS, which is the interplanetary file system, which is a distributed block storage mechanism and a distributed hash table. And Tor, which you probably have heard of, it's the Onion router, which is a long-standing web-based TCP proxying and HTTP proxying system that provides strong anonymity guarantees when browsing the internet. So we took these ideas and we built them into this framework for applications. Now, there's a lot of talk about Web 3.0 and the future of the internet being blockchain and all this. We really wrote Veilid as a response to some of that. We think of Veilid as like Web 1.5. It's like the web we kind of wanted, the idea that everyone could serve data. and that the concept of a permanent distributed ledger of all of your transactions ad infinitum might actually be problematic to privacy someday. So, we're really trying not to make transactions the core of the platform. In fact, I think you'll find that, the more you look at it, the key thing is that we've designed this with sort of a right to be forgotten built in. Things that people don't care about on the network disappear from it over time, but the things that do, are higher relevance to apps will be promoted on the network and stick around. So, we have a very sort of different philosophy about how we thought about laying this out. Anyway, so the whole thing is written in Rust, has bindings for Flutter, Dart, Python, and browser JavaScript. So, it works and compiles to WebAssembly, Windows, Mac, Linux desktops, applications, iOS, and Android. So, you can write your application and have it run wherever. The idea was presented in 2020. Took us about 6 months of thinking about the social ramifications of building this before we really got started. And the network is officially working 3 years later. It took a lot of code. I've spent the lion's share of the last, some odd 4 years of my life making this, and finally starting to drum up a lot of extra support from our crew on Discord. We started a nonprofit called the Veilid Foundation, which is there to just promote the network, to help me fly to places like this and talk about it. And for our very small hosting costs, obviously with a peer-to-peer system like this, we don't really have servers. Nobody does. So the cost model is different, and that's actually another reason why we wrote this, is it changes the game for developers. If you don't have to pay a cloud bill because there is no cloud, you don't have to make the same choices that you might make in terms of things like advertisement, funding your application. We've had a good run. The code is getting really stable and growing a lot. And we're kind of in recruitment mode, trying to get more developers to build apps on it and to help us with the framework and documentation and all of the new set of technologies that we want to build on top of it. We're at about 3,000 diverse members right now on the Discord. We do have documentation. There is a book that we're putting together. It's about, I'd say, about half done. These things take time, and when something is constantly moving, it's hard to document it, but we are stabilizing. We're not quite 1.0 with the framework yet. I'd say we're 0.5 right now. We do have Rust doc, so if you are interested in the shape of the API, you can go look on docs.rs. And there's various guides on how to set things up on our GitLab. Veilid is a community first, and we have applications being written by a lot of folks that are not core team at this point. We have maybe I say a lot, it's like 5, but it's a lot compared to 0. I'll give you some examples. If you want to see one app, like right now, you could. We have this app called Intersect, written by Evelyn Hobart, and that is running a full Veilid node in your browser when you go to the site. You have to go to the insecure HTTP site, http://intersect.blog. It's not actually insecure. We do all of the work in the browser. It's just that right now, until web transport gets released for Safari, we're holding off on full HTTPS support because we don't want to have Veilid apps depend on centralized TLS and SSL certificates. It would be best if we could just have apps talking to each other without requiring a big centralized infrastructure of certificate authorities and all of that. So come on, web transport. Well, you can do manual server certificate fingerprinting with web transport, which is really cool. Technically, we could do some of this with WebRTC as well, and we're working on that too. But anyway, Intersect is a sort of like a distributed paste bin. You can put things in various posts, hit go, save on that, and it gives you a link, and that link can be viewed by anybody that you share the link to. And it's made for small form content and things like Markdown. But it's not really stored anywhere specific. It's using our distributed hash table to store the content in an encrypted form. And there's no pastebin.com. There's no centralized place where your content lives. It just goes into Veilid and disappears until somebody decides to request it. So that's all running as a WebAssembly blob in your browser. It's actually being stored, served off of like an S3 bucket, like a static site. So it's not like it's communicating back to some server that served the HTTP page. It's actually just running as JavaScript inside the browser. Another example app is a console mode app called StigMerge. StigMerge is sort of like BitTorrent. It sends content that you seed, so you can take a file of your choice, and it will produce a link that can be handed to people, and they can download that file from you, and then that is transferred over our private routing mechanism. I think the first thing that was shared over Veilid was the movie Chud. I've never heard of Chud. Cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. Anyway, after that, I think it was The Matrix. Call out to the keynote John Willender for his teardown of The Matrix yesterday. That was kind of fun. Another app that someone has done, and Brandon Vandegrift did this app called VDrop. VDrop is also sort of like is also sort of like Intersect, but for arbitrary files, and you can like stream, you can send movies and sound and things into Veilid and then play them back from a link or download them. So it makes transferring files of larger size easier. And it's actually, it's not like the StigMerge, which is a sort of a torrent and live transfer and seeding system. This one actually chunks the file up and sends it all over the network, and it gets stored there for the duration that people care about it. As I mentioned, things tend to fall off the network when they aren't. Nobody cares about them anymore. So this is not free unlimited storage. You can't just start putting all of your terabytes of data on Veilid. It will eventually go away if people don't also download it and care about it. So there's also a game engine that someone plugged Veilid in as the backend. You can immediately see how a peer-to-peer network like this would be useful for replacing services like Steam or Xbox Live when games just want to talk to each other and players just want to play with each other, and you want to just have a lobby where you can meet other players. A system like this is extremely useful if you don't want to have sort of some service in the middle that everyone has to pay to use. So we have a bunch of contributors. If your name could be here next if you want to help. I'd like to call out Brandon for his API maintenance, and we have a bunch of other folks. We have you can see on here also Daniel Meyerson is someone who worked on our privacy policy. I think if you have any kind of interest in the legal side of all of this, you should go check out the Veilid privacy policy. It's actually the most fun legal read you'll have in a while. It's hard to explain in legalese how you don't capture any data at all. Like if you don't do anything and you don't have anything to keep private because you don't store anything, how do you communicate that? It turns out that there's a whole lot of new things that we have to sort of navigate in that space in order to truly explain our position and get us on the same page as everybody else legally. So anyway, Veilid is important. I wouldn't do this for 4 years if I didn't feel it was an important thing to do. The cloud doesn't have to be some billionaire's computers. We have in our pockets supercomputers these days. We don't use the power that we're carrying around with us nearly as much as we could be. That should be empowering. People often view mobile devices and social media and scrolling and whatever you do on your phone as sort of a mental time suck. But it's also a huge opportunity. The problem is the model around app distribution. Developers have to monetize everything these days in order to get by. You make an app, you have to, you want it to be free, you still kind of have to stick ads in it. You're still paying a cloud bill. You still have storage and a couple $100 a month of costs at least. It can be a perverse incentive. You have to make choices that you otherwise wouldn't if you had a different model. So we're hoping to incentivize building apps a different way and changing some of the decision making that developers have to make in order to publish their apps. So what are the risks to the actual privacy infrastructure? There are some things that we can't do anything about, but you can write apps that are accessible and you try to make things work for people so that the right things are the easiest and the hardest things that are the ones that you want people to avoid. You can think of the various kinds of risk in applications. Physical risk is like you lose your device. Someone could do a backup attack on your device, so you need to have things like encryption at rest for all of the content. I think you'll find that even popular applications that purport to be secure messengers like Signal don't necessarily encrypt everything at rest. And if you were to back up the databases from your desktop version of Signal, they're not really encrypted in a way that keeps your data private. Everything's encrypted in transit and as it flows through their servers, but once it gets to your device, it's decrypted and if someone were to capture your device, they would be able to make to dump the data very, very easily. So Veilid is designed to keep everything more secure at rest. We actually use things like the keychain on mobile devices and hardware-assisted storage, such that all of the data that is stored locally for an application is encrypted. So we're actually actively looking at these different kinds of risks and trying to make sure that the framework takes care of all of these things for you. As for adding a reporter to your war plans group chat, that is sort of an application level thing. The framework can't do a whole lot of that for you. But if I were Signal or I'm making this app called VeilidChat, we'll talk about that in a minute. There are things you could do. For example, there are privacy-preserving ways when adding a person to a group chat to inform the chat about how many people actually know the person that you just invited. And all of that could have been mitigated by simply having in the case of a peer-to-peer app, maybe a small homomorphic encryption-based submission of whether or not a particular new contact is in the contact list of all of the participants. How many people actually know this person? If you add somebody and all of a sudden it's like only one person in this chat knows that person, it should have popped up a warning. That's the kind of thing that it's too little, too late. But maybe in the future, chat apps like VeilidChat could mitigate problems like this by being a little more proactive about reporting things like how many people know the person that you just added. So anyway, there's all kinds of stuff like financial risk. Veilid is a completely open source and volunteer-driven project. We don't make any money. We're a nonprofit, so we can't have our business model used against us. If we just disappeared tomorrow, the code would still be out there and you could still use it. So we're hoping to eliminate various sources of risk this way. So anyway, Veilid was designed with security in mind. It runs everywhere. It uses standard protocols. It's completely in networks, so even things like our NAT traversal and the way our nodes are connected together do not use things like centralized stun servers, so you won't see us connecting to stun.google.com or using some of the typical things that you'll find with WebRTC-based peer-to-peer systems. We've thought about strong cryptography from the beginning, and we've aimed toward building a completely resilient network. We provide device-level secret storage and an encrypted table store for all applications. So a table store is a key value store that is completely local, but is fully encrypted on disk. So this actually uses IndexedDB in the browser and SQLite natively, just because that's typically what is already available on your phone. And there's a Rust crate for that. There's also a record store, which is our distributed hash table. And this sort of mirrors how the table store works, but works across the internet. So you can allocate record keys, push data into them, and they get distributed across the network in a locality-based form. I'm going to get into that briefly just to give you an idea of why our record store is better than some of the other DHTs that are out there. And we're working on a block store for content-addressable, larger chunked data and automating the stuff that you saw with StigMerge there, that BitTorrent chunking and streaming. That's sort of like a beta of how we're working on offering that through the framework itself. Cryptography. Nothing is forever. You have good algorithms that you can choose today to use to protect your data while it's at rest and in transit, but as the inexorable march of time progresses, everything falls eventually. Cryptography is something you have to plan to have become deprecated. So over time, we expect to replace the cryptography that we're using, and we don't want users of the framework to have to worry about how that happens. So we support simultaneous crypto systems today. So if you are using our VLD0 suite today, which is ED25519 based, tomorrow you might find that your app can use VLD1, which will be MLChem based, so for post-quantum. So having that all built into the framework frees people from having to worry too much about how the crypto does what it does, and just lets them use sort of an opinionated and well-thought-out suite of cryptographic operations uniformly. So your app doesn't have to change when our crypto does. Everything is timestamped, everything is encrypted, everything is signed, all of the node information is signed. You'll find that spoofing a Veilid node is not only pointless, but extremely difficult. And that is a challenge. By the way, if you want to play with Veilid, hack it, tear it apart, we have probably the most unique advisory and vulnerability response platform. We actually encourage everyone to hack the crap out of Veilid. It helps us. If you find security vulnerabilities, we're probably the only project out there that will take your exploit and put it in our repository right next to the code. So that you not only get credit, you get in the repo itself. The vulnerabilities that have been reported on Veilid are enshrined forever in an exploits folder for Veilid, because honestly, we need people to upgrade and replace the Veilid framework with a newer version when there's a vulnerability, and nothing incents people quite as much as knowing that the vulnerability's exploit is right there next to the rest of everything else. So I would say we go beyond full disclosure to actual releasing the vulnerability alongside our code. So feel free to help us in that effort. We have a schema system for everything. Everything is sort of evolution-based and upgradable over time. We have an RPC system that is upgradable over time. So as the network gets better, even older applications will be able to participate. Maybe not use some of the newer services, obviously, but the goal is that apps are not forgotten as the network improves over time. So right now we do have a crypto suite that is based on ED25519 for authentication, X25519 for key exchange, XChaCha20 Poly1305 for symmetric encryption, a fast message digest called Blake 3, and a password-based hash generation, nice, slow, painful algorithm called Argon 2, and that is sort of our VLD0 suite that everyone gets to use as part of the framework. And we are a member of the Post-Quantum Computing Alliance, so we are auditioning MLChem and the other newer post-quantum authentication and encryption algorithms for inclusion in Veilid in our next release of the suite. So everything is, the takeaway here is that everything is end-to-end encrypted. All storage is encrypted at rest as well, and that your data is protected even if you lose your device. There are keys that are in the keychain that will encrypt backups going to iCloud, for example, on your mobile device. So even if someone were to break into your iCloud, download all of your Veilid app storage, they wouldn't be able to decrypt it because the key for the device was never put into the backup. So anyway, real quick about our distributed hash table. It is pretty advanced. We have this kind of crazy schema-based thing that we do. A lot of distributed hash tables are just a key and a value, an arbitrary blob of data associated with some key that it gets, tells it where in hash space to send the data. But when you try to, look at the value get and value set operations, what you're really looking at is searching the graph of the network for a particular key. It turns out that DHT really is just search, and that locality is the number one problem with search. If you distribute your data across the whole internet, it's going to be a whole lot slower to try to piece it all back together from a million locations than it is from one. Now, if it's properly encrypted, it really doesn't really matter that it's only being stored in sort of localized fashion, because it could be stored anywhere. And given the way that our routing works, there's a lot of opportunity to sort of scatter your data all over the network. But that doesn't mean that the data itself doesn't benefit from locality. So the way we break this down, instead of just having a key and a value, we have a key with a set of related values and a schema that lets you define how operations work on those related values. This is a more sort of advanced use, but the idea is to allow you to build operational data structures. So things like linked lists and hash tables on top of hash tables, and actually, build real programming data structures on top of the DHT. So our, things like our chat app can use the DHT to store lists of contacts or giant lists of millions of messages, with chains of validation and whatnot. And that's all supported by the framework. But that would be very, very slow if, for example, every single message was on a different IP address on the internet and you had to reach out to thousands of machines just to download your chat log. So having a DHT that understands locality and can store relevant data in places that are close to data that is relevant or cared about, is sort of the key to making this performant. It's no good if privacy gets in the way of performance, because then nobody will use it. It has to feel snappy. It has to feel quick. So the DHT gives you full control over your data. It is not based on a blockchain or coin, and the popular data that people use frequently becomes more available through our caching system. So, if you put data and nobody cares about it, you don't even open it for 2 weeks, it might be gone. But if it's frequently used, it's going to be very snappy to produce, from any node. We have this notion of privacy that is backed up by an onion routing style system called Veilid Private Routes. Unlike Tor, we have this mechanism where both the source of a circuit, or a compiled route as we call it, and the destination both get some level of control over choosing the nodes that are in the route. We have to assume that if only one side of a communication channel were allowed to pick nodes, that one could be an attacker, and choosing nodes that only benefit them or are under their control. So we have this sort of Lego-based system where you can like snap together private routes that are, allocated by a destination and safety routes that are allocated by a source. So if you have a safety route, you have sender privacy. And if you have a private route, you have receiver privacy. And when you put them together, they get compiled into this compiled continuous route, where the first half of the route is possibly controlled by the sender, and the receiver can possibly control the nodes that are on the other side. And the way that works is all a bunch of math. You can kind of get into it if you want, but effectively, you can see this is the construction of how that works. And there's a secure envelope that takes your data and passes it along. We're working actively on a private routing 2.0 that makes it even harder to correlate traffic. If you were nation state level and could follow packets around the internet, there are some giveaways about maybe how packets are flowing and whatever. It's still very challenging and beyond the scope of even well-funded organizations to understand like how the data is actually flowing around Veilid. But obviously we can always be raising the bar and doing better. So feel free, if you're a crypto nerd, to pop into our Discord and criticize how we're doing private routing. We'd love to have input before we go 1.0 with a newer private routing system. But it works pretty well today. Veilid is accessible privacy. We really need things to be apps that people can use and that are designed for human beings. The reason why Tor, for example, isn't good enough for what we're trying to do is not that it isn't private. It's great privacy tool, but grandma is not going to download Tor and then proxy all over web communications. They just want apps that work the same way as every other app that they're used to. If you want to get privacy in the hands of everyone, it needs to work and feel and look like every other app. It has to work like Facebook. It has to work like Twitter. It has to work like whatever. You open up your email, the app. The login is sort of a familiar thing. The UI has got certain things people expect to work a certain way. The apps have to be accessible, and that doesn't just mean like large fonts and this typical things we think about when we think of accessibility. It has to be apps that everyone can use. So it's a challenge because privacy often has a cost associated with it. We're trying to make sure that the framework takes care of the parts that are complicated, so that privacy is not just accessible to Linux nerds. I love you, Linux nerds, but it's you're not doing anybody any favors if you don't get apps in the hands of everyone and make it easy to use. So eating our own dog food here, we are building an app called VeilidChat, which is sort of a signal-like private messenger that uses only the Veilid network for communication. You can go check it out and get on the test flight for it right now on Apple's platform, test flight, or on the Google Play Store. We have that. Or you can just go to the code and build it yourself. It's written in Flutter. Veilid has first-class bindings for Flutter and Dart, and links in the Rust core automatically. And you can see here the way this works is you basically create an account, which is a Veilid identity, and those identities could be used by multiple apps, not just VeilidChat. But for right now, it's the only one that uses it. But there's an identity mechanism, and that you can create a user. And then you can share contacts via QR code or with a little cut and paste blob over some other medium. So you could use another chat app or email and send someone your invitation and they can connect with you directly. And then it works just like a chat app. Today it's only text and emojis, but someday soon, hopefully we'll have other forms of media as well. So yeah, there's all kinds of new features. I did manage to get proper font scaling and low vision support in. It's been an interesting challenge for me getting better at writing mobile apps to do this. And we're working on more public contact invitations as well. There's all kinds of challenges when you have, what if you paste an invitation to your socials, and how do you know who actually accepted your invitation? There's this whole identity thing, and we're looking very closely at how Keybase does identity proofs as an opportunity to maybe add a similar system to Veilid. Obviously, this is sort of an extension on top of the framework that we're hoping people can help us with. So anyway, all that's missing is you. Veilid is what we make of all of it. It's like it's time to overflow internet data capitalism. If you share similar ethos, feel free to hop on our Discord and help us give users the privacy that they deserve. We have a 501c3 if you want to donate. We don't ask for much, but our costs are pretty low. If you just want to help us out, that's one way to do it. We're online on Veilid.com. We have a Mastodon, we have a Twitter, we have a Discord. Until we write something better and put all of this stuff on Veilid itself, that's where you can find us. And that's it. My name's DilDog. Nice to have talked with all of you. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to me after the presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a fascinating idea, and I think given the state of the internet at the moment, it's an important one as well. I will be checking it out.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A because we need to get set up for the next speaker, but I'm sure you'll be available to answer any questions people might have.
I'll be right here.
So join me in thanking you once again, Christien.
Thank you.